this house is for my family now. And if you want to stay, you'll have to pitch in with whatever's needed here, my son Alex said, his tone dry, like he was laying down the law to a stranger. That one sentence hit me harder than a bag of cement, freezing the blood right in my veins. My name is Frank. I am 78 years old, and I was born in Youngstown, Ohio. I lived almost my whole life in a small mobile home my folks left me. I worked construction since I was a kid, hauling bricks, putting up walls, until I finally made foreman. I didn't make a fortune, but I always had enough to live with dignity. When I retired, I kept doing small jobs to supplement my income, and thanks to that discipline, I was able to put a little nest egg to the side. My youngest son, Alex, lived with his wife Tara in a rented apartment in Dayton. Things weren't going well. The rent went up, his boss delayed his paycheck, and before I knew it, they were about to be evicted. I knew what it was like not to have a roof over your head, so I sold my little place and used my savings to buy a bigger one, a ranch-style house with 3 bedrooms so we could all live together. I thought I was helping the family and securing a little peace of mind for us. On moving day, I got up early, brewed a fresh pot of coffee, and warmed up some pastries. I helped Alex and Tara move their few suitcases into the back room. I felt proud. The house still smelled like fresh paint. The backyard was clean, and for a moment, I imagined this would be the start of better times for everyone. But in the afternoon, when I came back from the grocery store, I found a truck parked outside. People were unloading mattresses, bags, a stove. I recognized Tara's mom, Linda, but right along with her came the dad, 2 brothers, an aunt, and a teenage cousin. They were walking in and out like they owned the place. Tara, smiling, said they would stay a few days while they got settled. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. In the following days, I realized this wasn't a temporary stay. Tara's dad, Jerry, occupied a corner of the living room with his junk. The mom moved my pots and pans out of the way. The brothers used my backyard to park their bikes, and the requests started sounding a lot like orders. "Hey Frank, can you bring more water? You can sweep the deck." There was no please or thank you. Alex stayed quiet. Sometimes he avoided looking at me, like he didn't want to face the situation. But when he finally spoke, it was to remind me that, to him, this house was now his family's, and if I wanted to stay, I had to help. I didn't answer him. I just looked at him. Then I looked at my hands, and I went back to cleaning my boots. I spent more time out on the porch. I listened to the laughter coming from the living room, the sound of the pot on the stove, voices filling every corner of the house. I didn't need to say anything to feel that, little by little, my space there was shrinking. And that feeling, standing in a place I paid for but where I no longer seemed welcome, settled in silently. You know, it's a strange thing when the walls you paid for start closing in on you, making you feel like a guest in your own life. The morning after those words from Alex, the sun came through my bedroom window, but it didn't bring any warmth. It brought a heaviness. I got up earlier than everyone, as always. I made coffee for myself without making noise. Before, when we lived in my little place, I made coffee for everyone. I used to fill the table with donuts. I served the plates with care. Now I didn't even know if there was enough room to leave a pitcher on the table without someone moving it. I went out to the backyard with my mug and sat down to look at the sky. It was a clear day, with that blue you only see in Ohio. I heard footsteps behind me. It was Jerry, who barely acknowledged me with a nod and walked past toward the gate. Not even a good morning. Minutes later, 2 of Tara's brothers came out with their bikes, kicking up dust, and one of them left the gate wide open. I didn't feel at home anymore. Every corner was occupied by something that wasn't mine. In the living room, Tara's aunt had spread a quilt over the sofa to sleep. In the dining room, there was a big box of clothes I didn't recognize. In the kitchen, my utensils were mixed with theirs, and the old skillets I had used for years were now piled in a corner, as if they were useless. That day, while I poured myself a little more coffee, I overheard a conversation in the kitchen. Tara was telling her mother, "We're going to be better here, Mom. Nobody is going to kick us out here." Her mother replied, "Well, yeah, this house is perfect for everyone. Frank is already old. He doesn't need so much space." They didn't know I was listening. Or maybe they did and didn't care. I didn't answer. I went to my room, opened the drawer of the nightstand, and took out the envelope where I kept the house papers. I ran my hand over the deed, that document that bore my name, and put it back. That piece of paper was the only thing that still reminded me that even though they wanted to erase me, I was still the owner. It's funny how a single piece of paper can hold more weight than 1,000 cruel words, ain't it? As days went by, the routine changed completely. They no longer asked me if I wanted to eat. They served, and if there were leftovers, they left them for me on the table. Sometimes I had to reheat what remained. I didn't mind cooking for myself. What hurt was feeling that they had decided to push me away from the table without saying it out loud. Alex, when he was around, stayed in his room with Tara. We almost didn't talk. When he did, it was to ask me if I could lend a hand with something. Take the brother-in-law's motorcycle to the shop, go pay the electric bill because you know the utility folks better, or fix a door that got stuck. They were errands disguised as trust, but I knew they were chores they didn't want to do. I started observing more. I'm not talking about spying, but noticing. I noticed the electric bill went way up. So many gadgets, so many cell phones charging. I noticed the pantry emptied out in a few days and that what I bought from the store disappeared fast. I noticed that nobody, aside from me, cleaned the backyard. There was a day late in the week that I came back with a big bag of beans, rice, and oil. As soon as I put the things on the table, Tara told me, "Oh, Frank, good thing you brought this. Now we have enough for everyone." And she started putting everything away without even offering me a glass of water. That "for everyone" sounded like an echo drilling into my head. Despite everything, I didn't show anger. Rage, when released without measure, is wasted. I preferred to save it. I knew that if I exploded, they would use it to paint me as the grumpy old man who doesn't want to share. And I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. In the afternoons, I sat on the little bench by the entrance. From there, I watched the street, waved to the neighbors, and above all, I thought. Not about how to leave, but about how to stay. But stay on my terms. Silence is sometimes a weapon sharper than a knife. One night, while everyone was in the living room watching TV, I went out to the backyard with a blanket and stayed there, looking at the stars. I remembered when Alex was a kid and ran through the dirt roads barefoot with a worn-out ball. I remembered how I built him a wooden tricycle because there was no money for a real one. I remembered the day he hugged me tight after I defended him from some older boys. And I asked myself at what moment that boy stopped seeing me as his father and started seeing me as a burden. But questions sometimes don't have immediate answers. The only thing clear to me was that I wasn't going to let them push me out of my own life little by little. I am not a man of many words, but when I say them, they carry weight. And for now, the weight was in the silence. I realized then that patience isn't just about waiting. It's about sharpening your blade while the other guy thinks you're sleeping. Some days passed without major incidents, but the atmosphere was the same. Tara's family talked about our house in front of me as if I were invisible. Alex didn't correct anyone. I started getting up earlier to have a moment of peace before everyone woke up. That time was mine. The coffee, the fresh air, and the sound of birds on the power line. One morning, while I was sweeping the deck, one of Tara's brothers said to me, "Hey Frank, can you hurry it up? We're going to put meat on the grill." I looked at him steady, calmly, and told him, "Nobody rushes me here, son. I clean this deck at my own pace." He didn't yell, but he walked off muttering something I didn't catch. That day I confirmed that even though I didn't raise my voice, my way of looking and answering made them uncomfortable. And that gave me a small satisfaction because even though they didn't say it, they were starting to realize I wasn't the kind of man who lets himself be pushed around without pushing back. At night, I locked myself in my room and, as was now habit, took out the envelope with the deed. I put it on the table and looked at it for a good while. It wasn't just a document. It was my strongest card. But it wasn't time to play it yet. They need to believe, truly believe, that I am defeated. Only then, when the time comes, the blow will be more precise. For now, my plan was simple. Endure, observe, and wait. Because patience, when mixed with memory, becomes something much more powerful than rage. On a Tuesday morning, the noise in the house started before the sun came up. It was 6 o'clock, and you could already hear the blender, the TV in the living room, and Tara's cousin talking on the phone at full volume. I was sitting on my bed looking out the window, and I thought maybe it was time to change my routine. Not to adapt to them, but so they wouldn't always find me in the same place at the same time, like I was part of the furniture. I got dressed, packed my most personal things in a box, some photos, an old watch, the envelope with the deed, and put them inside the wardrobe. It wasn't that I was afraid they'd take them, but I preferred them not to be in plain sight. Then I left without saying anything and walked to the main square. I stayed there a while, sitting on a bench, greeting folks I knew, drinking a black coffee I bought at a stand. It was the first morning in weeks that I felt the air belonged to me. When I returned, the kitchen was full. Tara's mom and the aunt were arguing about what to make for lunch, while the father watched TV with his feet on the table. Alex wasn't there. They looked at me like they just realized I lived there. I didn't say anything, went straight to my room and started reading an old newspaper. That afternoon, I ran into Alex in the backyard. He asked me if I could lend him some money to cover the rent for a storage unit a friend had lent him for a motorcycle. I looked at him, took a deep breath, and answered him. "I can't right now, son. I'm saving for my own things." He didn't like it. His face changed, but he didn't insist. It was the first time since we moved that I told him no, and even though it hurt me, I felt it was necessary. In the following days, I started going out more often. I went to the market, but I also stopped to chat with neighbors, to visit an old friend who had a carpentry shop. I didn't say much about my situation, but I listened. I observed. Every outing was, for me, a reminder that there was a world outside those walls and that not everything was under the control of Tara's family. One Sunday morning, while everyone slept, I got up early and made breakfast. Eggs with beans, toast, hot coffee. I set the table like I used to, with clean plates and folded napkins. I sat down to eat, alone. When they started getting up, I was already washing my dishes. Tara said to me, "Oh, you didn't make enough for everyone?" I answered without looking. "Today I cooked for me." Everyone knows how to start their own day. The kitchen went silent for a few seconds. Then I heard the mother muttering something under her breath, but I didn't care. That small gesture gave me something I hadn't felt in a while. Control. It was my way of drawing a line, even in the simplest thing, and I discovered that it made them uncomfortable. They weren't used to me acting on my own without offering them anything. Over time, I started doing other similar things. I washed my clothes separately, kept my dry goods in a bag inside the closet, locked my bedroom door when I went out. It wasn't to isolate myself, but to make it clear that there were parts of me and my things that didn't belong to them. One Thursday afternoon, Tara's older brother left his motorcycle in the backyard, blocking the path to the laundry area. When I arrived with a bucket of clothes, I asked him to move it. He told me he was in a rush and would move it later. I didn't argue. I went to the room, grabbed my set of keys, and moved the bike myself, putting it on the sidewalk outside. He came out annoyed, saying I had no reason to touch it. I looked him in the eyes and answered, "And you have no reason to block my path in my house." That last sentence shut him up. You gotta teach people how to treat you, even if the lesson is a hard pill to swallow. That night, Alex came into my room. He didn't knock, as always. He asked if there was a problem with the family leaving some more things in the patio because they were fixing up a room for themselves. I told him the patio wasn't a storage unit, and if they wanted space, they could look for it outside. He pursed his lips and said, I was changing. I didn't answer. Sometimes silence weighs more than an argument. Meanwhile, I kept storing everything in my memory. I didn't take notes, but I remembered every look, every word, every lack of respect. Not out of spite, but because I knew one day that information would be useful. At night, when the house quieted down, I stayed on the porch looking at the distant lights of the hills. I thought about my father, who taught me never to give up. He used to say, "Son, the land you work with your hands is yours, but you have to defend it." And even though the land was now concrete and brick, the principle was the same. There was a day I decided not to eat at home. I left early, went to the market, bought a plate of brisket, and ate it sitting in the plaza. Upon returning, Tara told me they had made food and saved me a plate, but with a tone that didn't sound like kindness, but control. I thanked her, but told her I had already eaten. That simple answer seemed to irritate her more than I imagined. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I wasn't going to let them decide even what I ate. Every action of mine, however small, was a way to recover the right to decide over my life. And so, little by little, the house started to feel my absences and my silences. I wasn't the quiet grandpa in the corner. I was the man who was starting to slip out of their reach, who didn't respond as they expected. And although they didn't know it yet, every step I took outside that control was a brick I removed from the wall they had built between us. I knew there was still a ways to go before things reached a breaking point, but I also knew that when that moment arrived, they wouldn't find me weak or resigned. They would find me ready. The tension in the house was no longer invisible. You could cut it in the air, like when the wind gets heavy before a storm. I felt it in every step I took down the hallway. Every time I opened the kitchen door and found stairs that didn't include me. They didn't need to say anything. The walls spoke for them. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was in the yard sweeping dry leaves. Tara's older brother was sitting on a plastic chair looking at his cell phone. I walked up and asked him to move his backpack, which was blocking the way to the wash basin. He didn't even look at me, just said, "I'll move it in a sec." I kept sweeping, but 10 minutes later the backpack was still there. I walked over, picked it up, and put it in a corner. It was then that he lifted his head and said, "Hey, Frank, you don't have to touch my stuff." I looked him steady and answered, "And you don't have to leave your stuff in other people's way. Learn that." The sentence wasn't loud, but it was heavy. He got up, huffed, and went inside the house. Minutes later, I heard him talking to his mother and Tara in the kitchen, saying I was in a bad mood. I didn't care. I went back to my work. That same night, when Alex arrived, Tara met him at the entrance. I didn't hear everything, but I caught my name several times. He came into my room without knocking, just like had become habit. "Dad, what is going on? They tell me you're picking fights with everyone." I closed the newspaper and looked at him. "I'm not fighting with anyone, son. I'm just asking for respect. And if that bothers your people, that ain't my problem." That last part hurt him. He stayed silent for a few seconds and then said, "Well, remember, this house is for everyone, and if you want to stay, we have to be at peace." I smiled, barely, and answered, "Peace starts when one respects the other, Alex. You remember that too." He didn't raise his voice, but he left visibly annoyed. As days passed, I started noticing Tara's family changing small things to inconvenience me. The chair, where I always sat at the table, one day appeared occupied by a box of tablecloths. My coffee mug disappeared, and when I found it, it was in a corner of the yard with dirt inside. The space in the pantry I used to keep my things was filled with cans and bags that weren't mine. It wasn't a coincidence. I didn't respond with shouting. I responded with acts. One Saturday, I got up early and put my chair on the porch in the spot where the morning sun always hit me. While I was eating breakfast, Tara's mother approached and said, "That chair belongs in the living room. You better put it back." I answered her, "I bought this chair, and where I put it, that's where it stays." The woman didn't answer, but she left with a hard expression. That same day in the afternoon, I went to the market and bought fruit, bread, and cheese. I kept everything in a box I put in my room. When Tara noticed, she asked, "What's that? You gonna keep food in your room?" I answered her, "It's what I buy with my money, so it doesn't get lost." She pursed her lips and said nothing more, but there was anger in her eyes. The small clashes became more frequent. They weren't shouting matches, but clashes of looks, measured words. Alex tried to stay on the sidelines, but I noticed his silence was more out of convenience than wanting to resolve anything. As long as there wasn't a scene, he didn't get involved. One afternoon, while I was fixing a patio door, I heard Tara's teenage cousin say to one of the brothers, "Well, this old man won't be around long, you'll see." I stayed still, without letting them know I heard. I didn't answer them, but I stored those words. That night, I ate dinner alone on the porch. The air was cool and the streetlights flickered in the distance. I thought about everything that had happened since I moved. I remembered every little gesture of contempt, every word that sought to make me feel less than. And more than anger, what I felt was clarity. They thought I was cornered, that I only had acceptance left. What they didn't know is that they hadn't yet seen what I'm capable of when they want to erase me from my own turf. You see, folks mistake kindness for weakness. That's a dangerous mistake to make with a man who's poured concrete his whole life. Sunday morning, I decided I wasn't going to be locked up in the house all day. I went to visit Joe, an old friend from construction who now had a mechanic shop. I spent several hours there, chatting and drinking coffee. Upon returning, already in the afternoon, Tara received me with a dry tone. "You weren't here for lunch today. We made pot roast for everyone." I smiled and answered, "That's nice. I ate with a friend." And I walked right past. I saw how her face hardened. She wanted me to be always under her control, available for her schedules, her rules. Every time I broke that expectation, she lost a little dominance over me. And that, little by little, was making her lose patience. That same week, Alex asked me for money again. He said it was to cover some house expenses. I asked him what expenses. He stuttered. He said they were miscellaneous things. So I answered him, "If you can't tell me exactly what for, I can't help you." He got annoyed, but didn't insist. He knew the ground was shifting. It wasn't the moment to act definitively yet, but it was time to make clear they couldn't move me like a piece on their board. And every time I stood firm, they noticed it, even if they didn't admit it. Thursday night, while everyone was watching TV, I went out to the street to walk. The night air cleared my mind. I passed in front of the church and stood a few minutes in silence, thinking not of revenge yet, but of strategy. The patience I had learned in years of work served me now more than ever. When I returned, the house was silent. I passed by the living room and saw my empty chair. I put it back in its place and sat down, not to watch TV, but to be there, present, occupying the space that is mine. They could move my things, they could talk behind my back, but as long as I remained there, reminding them I'm not invisible, the story wasn't written yet. The July heat in Dayton doesn't forgive. That week, the sun seemed to beat down right on the corrugated roof of the patio, and the air inside the house became heavy. I got up early, as always, to take advantage of the morning cool. I was sweeping the porch when I heard a loud crash in the kitchen. I went in and found Tara's teenage cousin throwing a pot on the floor. "It wasn't me, it fell by itself," he said, shrugging his shoulders. The pot, one of the ones I had bought with my money just a few months ago, was dented. I bent down, picked it up, and looking straight at him, I told him, "In this house, when one breaks something, you say it, and you take responsibility." He let out a mocking laugh and left without answering. Tara, who was washing dishes, looked at me and said, "Oh, Frank, don't get mad over a pot. Here, everything belongs to everyone." That phrase was like pouring lemon on an open wound. I looked at her and answered, "No, Tara. Nothing here belongs to everyone. There are things here I paid for, and I respect that they are for everyone. But that doesn't mean they aren't taken care of." She frowned, but said nothing more. Mid-morning, Alex came back from work. As soon as he entered, Tara told him about the pot, but her way, saying I was in a bad mood and scolding the boys. Alex came to my room. "Dad, what's going on? I don't want problems over nonsense." I closed the book I was reading and answered him. "The nonsense is what starts breaking respect, son. And if you don't stop it in time, later, there's no turning back." I don't know if he understood, but he stayed quiet. He ran his hand over his face and told me, "It's just that here we all have to learn to coexist." I looked at him and answered, "Coexistence starts with respecting what isn't yours. If not, it's not coexistence. It's abuse." That day, I decided not to eat lunch at home. I went to Betty's Diner, a friend from years back. She welcomed me with a hug, served me a bowl of beef stew and a cold soda. We talked a while, and it did me good to feel listened to without being judged. When I returned, well into the afternoon, the atmosphere in the house was charged. Tara's mother called me to the kitchen. "Frank, we need to talk." I sat down, although I already knew where this was going. "It's just that we've noticed that lately you've been very distant, as if you didn't want to share with us. And well, here we all have to cooperate and help with whatever is needed." I took a deep breath and answered, "Cooperating ain't obeying orders. Helping ain't doing everything you folks don't want to do. And sharing doesn't mean everything of mine gets used without respect." An uncomfortable silence fell. Tara's aunt, who was listening, muttered something like, "Well, if he doesn't like it, he should leave." There I felt the first real hit of rage in weeks. I stood up slowly, looked at the two of them and said, "I'm not going anywhere. I bought this house, and as long as my name is on the deed, I'm going to be here. Whoever doesn't agree knows where the door is." And I left the kitchen. That night, Alex came to my room. He closed the door and told me in a low voice, "Dad, we can't go on like this. Tara is very upset. My mother-in-law, too. If we continue like this, there are going to be big problems." I looked at him and told him, "The problems don't start because I set boundaries, Alex. They start because you all think you can erase me from a place I built for everyone." He didn't answer. He just ran his hand through his hair and left. The following days were a silent war. Nobody spoke to me more than necessary. Food was served and they didn't call me. I made mine separate without waiting for an invitation. I washed my dishes, kept my things, and spent more time out than in. But the tension exploded one Sunday afternoon. I was in the yard watering some plants when I heard furniture moving in my room. I went in and found Tara's younger brother and the cousin moving my wardrobe. "What are you doing here?" I asked, with a tone that even I felt was stronger than usual. "Nothing. It's just we're going to store some things here," said the boy, as if it was nothing. I walked up, closed the wardrobe door with force, and told them, "Nothing is stored here that isn't mine. Get out right now." They looked at each other and one muttered, "Crazy old man." There I didn't hold back. "Not crazy, owner. And if you enter my room again without permission, I won't be responsible for what happens." The two left muttering something I didn't care to understand. That same night, I locked my room with a key and put the envelope with the deed inside a safer box. Something told me I couldn't leave it in plain sight one more day. That night, I slept little. I heard footsteps, doors, whispers. I didn't know if it was my imagination or if they were really planning something, but what I did know was that the time for only observing was coming to an end. It was no longer about small lacks of respect. Now, they were crossing the line of invading my personal space. And if they crossed that line once, they would do it again and again until there was nothing left that belonged to me. While I lay in bed looking at the ceiling, I remembered a phrase my father told me when I was young. "Son, when they want to push you off your land, don't argue. Act." That phrase stayed with me until dawn. And dawn, for me, that time meant something different. That patience has a limit, and mine was close. There comes a moment in every man's life where he has to decide if he's going to be the hammer or the nail. I was done being the nail. The week after the incident in my room was different. Not because Tara's family had changed their attitude, but because I had already made a decision in silence. I wasn't going to wait for them to kick me out. I was going to move before they took the next step, and for that, I had to plan. Monday early, I left before everyone woke up. I walked to the square and sat on the usual bench, the one facing the church. There I found Joe, my old friend from construction. I bought him a coffee and we talked a good while. I didn't tell him everything, but I told him enough for him to understand I needed advice. When in your own house they don't treat you like the owner anymore, it's time to remind them who you are, he told me. His words stuck with me. Before going back home, I stopped by the attorney's office where I signed the deed years ago. I greeted Mr. Stevens, an older man who has known me for decades. I asked him casually about the procedure to make some changes to a property. I didn't give him details, but he explained the steps. I left there with a clearer head and a folded paper in my pocket, a list of documents I might need. When I got home, the situation was the same. Tara and her mother in the kitchen, her brothers watching TV, the cousin sleeping on the sofa. Nobody asked me where I had been. I locked myself in my room and put the list inside the envelope with the deed. The following days, I started organizing myself. I went through my things, separated what was really important and what I could leave behind without problems. I realized that many of my belongings didn't have material value, but sentimental. Photographs, letters, tools I used for years. I packed them in a sturdy box and hid it in a corner of the wardrobe, covered with an old blanket so nobody would notice. One Wednesday, I took advantage that everyone was busy to do something I hadn't done since we arrived. Inspect every corner of the house. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just wanted to measure the terrain, know exactly what spaces were mine and what they had already occupied. I discovered that the storage shed in the yard, which was originally empty, was now full of boxes belonging to Tara's family. I also saw they had put a padlock on one of the rooms that was free at the beginning. It didn't surprise me, but it confirmed they were advancing, occupying more and more. I didn't say anything, I just observed. And while I observed, I was building the mental map of my next move. Thursday, I went to the market early. I bought the usual, but I also stopped by the hardware store and acquired a small combination lock. That same afternoon, I placed it on my bedroom door. Tara noticed it and asked me with a tone between curiosity and annoyance. "What's that for?" I answered her without raising my voice. "To look after my things. same as you look after yours." She didn't say more, but her expression confirmed the message had arrived. That padlock was my first visible act of defense. From there, I felt I could start regaining ground. Friday, Alex asked me to accompany him to the bank to make a deposit. I accepted, not because I wanted to, but because I was interested in observing. While he talked to the teller, I looked at the brochures and remembered Mr. Stevens' words. I knew that if everything went as planned, soon I would need to go to the bank myself for other matters. Matters Alex didn't even imagine. That night, while everyone was watching a TV show, I went out to the backyard and stood looking at the sky. I felt that warm air that precedes rain. I thought of my father again, how he always said that the storm gives no warning, but he who is prepared doesn't fear it. I was preparing myself. Saturday, after lunch, I decided to go visit another friend, Bill, who had been my coworker on several jobs. He knew people at the municipality and the recorder's office. We spent the afternoon talking, and little by little, I told him more details. I didn't need to tell him everything, but enough for him to understand I was about to make an important decision. "If you're going to do it, Frank, do it fast and without warning. Don't give them time to react," he told me. That advice became part of my plan. I went back home with a calm step, as if nothing had happened. Inside, however, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. Sunday, while we were eating breakfast, Tara's mother said out loud, almost as if it were a notice, "Soon we're going to fix up the backyard so we have more space for us." Alex, who was there, nodded. I simply left my mug on the table and said, "The backyard doesn't get touched without my permission." The silence that followed was long. I wasn't looking to argue in that moment. What I sought was to make clear that, although I kept quiet most of the time, I wasn't blind or deaf, and that I still had a voice. That day in the afternoon, I went out to walk alone. I passed in front of the attorney's office again, but didn't go in. I just looked at the facade and thought of the list I had saved. I already had everything I needed, except one detail. And that detail I would get in the coming days. The following Monday, I left early saying I was going to the market, but took another route. I went to the county recorder's office to confirm something I already knew. The house was still in my name, without any liens, mortgages, 5 owners. I walked out of there with a copy of the registry under my arm. That paper, along with the deed, was the strongest proof I had. Upon returning, I found everyone in the yard laughing and grilling meat. Nobody asked me where I had been. I poured myself a coffee, sat in my chair, and observed. They believed I was resigned. They didn't know that, while they distracted themselves, I was already moving the pieces that would define the end of this story. That night before sleeping, I took out all the documents: deed, Mr. Stevens' list, copy of the registry. I put them on the table and looked at them for a good while. I wasn't a man of studies, but I knew how to read enough to understand what I had in my hands. Power. And power, when used at the right moment, is stronger than any scream. I put everything away again and lay down. Outside, the wind started blowing harder, and inside me, the calm of patience was giving way to the certainty that the hour to act was getting closer. The August heat stuck to the skin like a wet blanket. Since early on, the house was full of noise, the TV at full volume in the living room, a blender roaring in the kitchen, and mixed voices rising and falling like they were in a marketplace. I was in my room, sitting by the window, drinking my coffee in silence. I knew the day was going to be long. Mid-morning, I went out to the yard to hang my washed clothes. Tara's younger brother was sitting on the curb, smoking. The smoke hit me all at once. "Hey, no smoking here," I told him firmly. He looked at me, let out a laugh, and answered, "Well, this is everyone's patio now, Frank." I stayed still for a few seconds. Then I walked up to him. I took the cigarette from his hand and put it out against the wall. No, this patio is still mine, and while I am here, my rules are respected. He got up with a look like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. At lunchtime, Tara set the table with plates and silverware for everyone, except for me. It wasn't an oversight. I stood observing the scene, and when everyone sat down, I went to the kitchen, grabbed my plate and silverware, and served myself. I sat at the head of the table, as I had always done, and started eating. Nobody said a word, but the heavy silence felt like a fight without screams. Alex arrived that night. I noticed he was tired, but also with an air of discomfort. He told me we had been having too much friction and that Tara's family felt attacked. I looked at him and answered, "Respect ain't an attack, son. What's happening is that things are getting confused here. You all think that because I don't yell, I accept everything, and it ain't so." He didn't answer. The following days were a series of provocations. My chair on the porch disappeared one day and appeared in the aunt's room. The space where I kept my grocery bag was occupied with water jugs that weren't mine. I even found that someone had opened one of my boxes in the wardrobe. That last one was what really fired me up. I decided I wasn't going to let even one pass anymore. Wednesday, when I saw the teenage cousin using my tools to fix his bike, I approached and told him, "That box gets left alone. If you need something, you ask. And if you don't know how to ask, you don't use it." He looked at me with mockery and said, "And if I don't?" I took a step closer, looked him in the eyes, and answered, "Then you're going to learn the hard way." He got up and left the tool on the table. That same afternoon, I put a second padlock on the closet where I kept my most important things. Tara noticed it and said, "Are you afraid we're going to steal something?" I answered her, "I ain't afraid. I just have a memory. And memory has taught me better safe than sorry." Friday, while I was eating breakfast, Tara's mother said loudly, "Well, I think soon we should reorganize the rooms so we can be more comfortable." It was like she threw a rock at me. I left the mug on the table and answered, "Nothing moves here without me saying so. And if you don't like it, the door is open." The woman looked at me with contempt and left without saying anything. That night, Alex came to talk to me. "Dad, don't you think you're being too hard? You're making everyone feel uncomfortable." I took a deep breath and told him, "Alex, I've been feeling uncomfortable since this house stopped being my home to become a boarding house where everyone demands and nobody says thanks. And I'm going to tell you something else. That deed is still in my name, and I'm not going to let anyone take what is mine." He stayed quiet a few seconds. "And what do you plan to do?" he asked. I looked him steady. "That, son, you'll know the moment you need to know." From there on, I changed my routine. I went out more often, but not always to the same place. Sometimes I went to see Joe. Other times I stopped by the attorney's. Other times I went to the market. But I took longer than necessary. I didn't want them to know exactly where I was or who I was talking to. One Sunday afternoon, while everyone was busy in the kitchen, I went into the yard shed and checked the boxes they had put there. I wasn't interested in the content, but knowing how full they were, I realized that a good part of what they stored were things they could move out fast if necessary. I smiled to myself. In that house, the only ones who could really be displaced in an instant were them. That night, while dining alone, I felt the moment was approaching. I didn't know if it would be in a week or in a month, but every gesture, every word, every invasion of my space was pushing the situation toward a point of no return. Before sleeping, I took out the deed and the copy of the registry. I put them on the table next to the list Mr. Stevens gave me. I turned on the lamp and stared at them. They weren't just papers. They were my exit key and, at the same time, my weapon of defense. That early morning, I dreamed of my father again. I saw him young, hands full of dirt, looking at me and saying, "When it's time, son, it's time. Don't let it pass." I woke up with that phrase in my head, and while the morning sun came through the window, I knew the hour was almost here. There's a calm that comes right before you drop the hammer. It's not peace, exactly, it's certainty. Monday dawned with a strange air. Maybe it was just me, but I felt every sound in the house was louder, more present. Spoons hitting plates, voices in the kitchen, the TV on since early. I got dressed calmly, put some papers in a folder, and left without saying where I was going. I walked to the attorney's office. Mr. Stevens received me with his usual formality. "You have everything ready, Frank?" he asked me. I nodded and handed him the deed, the registry copy, and my ID. "Perfect. We can have the rest prepared in 2 days." I didn't go into details, and he didn't ask either. That was what I liked about Stevens. He knew when not to talk more than necessary. I left there and went straight to the bank. I withdrew a considerable amount of money I had saved for a long time. I put it in an envelope and kept it inside my jacket. Then I stopped by the market. I bought some small things, bread, coffee, some fruit, so it wouldn't raise suspicions. When I returned home, Tara's aunt was at the door. She looked at me with that curiosity she couldn't hide. "And where were you so early?" she asked. "My business," I told her, and walked past. There was nothing else to add. That day, I decided to stay longer on the porch, reading an old newspaper. Tara's mother passed by several times, looking at me sideways. I felt something in my attitude made her nervous. Maybe because, for the first time in a long while, they didn't see me annoyed or resigned, but calm. In the afternoon, I looked for Alex. He was in his room checking his phone. "Son, I need you to sign a paper as a witness," I told him. He looked at me surprised. "What paper?" "Nothing serious, just a personal formality." He signed it without reading much. That paper had nothing to do with the house yet, but it was part of a move that would soon fit with the rest. The next day I went out early again. This time I went to see Bill, the friend who had contacts at the municipality. I brought him a coffee and we sat in his shop. I told him I was about to make an important change and might need his help to move some papers fast. Bill smiled. "You tell me when, and we do it quiet." That sentence gave me the certainty I had everything I needed. That afternoon, upon returning, I found the living room cluttered with bags and boxes everywhere. I asked what was happening. Tara answered, "We're seeing how to reorganize to be more comfortable." I looked at her and said, "Don't move anything of mine, not a single object." She shrugged, but her look said my confidence bothered her. That night, I kept the folder with the documents in a different place, outside my room. I wasn't going to run the risk that, if it occurred to them to search, they would find it. Wednesday, while eating breakfast, Alex told me he had heard I was doing paperwork. I answered with a half smile. "Folks always talk, son, but not everything they say is true." I knew the intrigue was part of the game. I spent the rest of the day moving like nothing was up, but inside I felt every piece falling into place. If everything went as planned, in a few days the story of this house was going to change, and not in their favor. That night, while everyone talked in the living room, I stayed on the porch, listening to the wind, and in silence I confirmed for myself. I was ready. Thursday, I woke up before the rooster crowed. I got dressed, put the folder with the documents in a leather bag, and left without making noise. The street was cold, and that morning air gave me the energy I needed. I walked with a firm step to the attorney's office. Mr. Stevens was already waiting for me. "Ready to sign, Frank?" he asked. I nodded. We sat down, reviewed the papers once more, and he explained every point. I didn't need it. I had already read everything at home, but I let him talk. I signed where he indicated 1, 2, 3 times. He also signed, stamped, and handed me a copy. "With this, in a couple of days, the change will be official," he said. I put everything away carefully and shook his hand. I left the office and went straight to the bank. I made another important transaction, this time with a clear objective. When the teller handed me the receipt, I folded it and put it with the papers. It wasn't the kind of thing anyone would understand at first glance, but for me, every movement was connected. Before going back home, I stopped by Carl's store, a man I'd known for decades. I bought some big boxes and asked him to bring them to the usual address. "Moving, Frank?" he asked with a smile. "Something like that," I answered. It wasn't a lie. Upon arriving home, I found Tara and her mother in the kitchen, speaking in low voices. They saw me enter but didn't ask anything. I went up to my room, closed the door, and began packing some things in the boxes. Only the necessary, what had value for me. The rest could stay. That afternoon, Alex arrived and found me in the middle of the task. "What are you doing, Dad?" he asked. "Organizing my things," I answered without looking. "Why? Are you going to leave?" I shrugged. "You never know, son. Always good to be ready." That night, I hid the folder with the documents in a place only I knew, a false bottom in an old suitcase that had belonged to my father. Nobody, except me, knew that compartment existed. Friday early, I went out again. This time, I went to the county recorder. I handed the papers to the clerk and signed another document. "With this, everything is recorded," he said. His words were like closing the last piece of a puzzle I had been assembling for weeks. When I returned, the house was silent. Too silent. I went in and found everyone in the living room. Tara, her mother, the brothers, the cousin. Alex was standing. "Dad, we have to talk," he said. I sat in a chair facing them. "I'm listening." Tara was the first. "It's just, we think it's not comfortable for everyone to live like this anymore. We think it's best you look for a place to be more tranquil." I stood looking at her a few seconds. Then I passed my gaze over each one of them. "I understand. So you want me to leave the house I bought?" Alex tried to soften it. "It's not that, Dad, but there are already too many people here," and I raised my hand to interrupt him. "Don't worry, son. Just today I resolved everything I had to resolve." I got up, went to my room, and came back with the folder. I put it on the table, opened it slowly, took out the deed and the copy of the registry. "See this? Here it says clearly who is the owner of this house, and it remains the same since the first day. Me." I saw how their faces changed. Some turned pale, others frowned. Tara crossed her arms. "And what does that mean?" I leaned forward. "It means I decide who lives here, and starting today, this house isn't for everyone. It's for whoever respects the rules. And you all didn't respect them." Alex took a step toward me. "Dad, don't do this." I looked him steady. "Son, I didn't start it. I'm just finishing what you all began." I took another paper from the folder. "Here is the notice I filed today. Starting next week, you will have to leave. All of you." A heavy silence fell over the living room. Tara's mother got up, red with anger. "You can't do that!" I straightened up. "Sure I can. And I'm going to." I turned around and went up to my room. I locked the door and sat on the bed. Outside, I heard altered voices, hurried footsteps, doors opening and closing. I didn't care. I knew that, in that moment, I had broken the illusion they had that they could control me. That night, I slept better than in a long time. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was different. There was no laughter, no music, just a dense silence, interrupted by whispers in the kitchen. I knew they were talking about me, about what I had said the night before. I didn't care. I poured my coffee, drank it on the porch, and let the sun warm my face. A while later, Alex approached. He looked tired, eyes red, like he hadn't slept. "Dad, are you really going to do this?" he asked. I looked at him, without harshness but with firmness. "Alex, I gave you this house so you would have a home, not so it would turn into a place where I have no voice. I gave you time, patience, and respect. I didn't receive the same, and everything has a limit." He tried to argue, say we could talk about it, but his tone wasn't reconciliation. It was negotiation to lose as little as possible. And I wasn't up for half measures anymore. "There is nothing more to talk about, son. The decision is made." In the days that followed, the house turned into a field of tension. Tara avoided crossing paths with me, but her brothers shot me looks loaded with resentment. The teenage cousin made noise on purpose when he passed my door. Tara's mother ignored me completely. I didn't respond to any of those provocations. Thursday, the official notice arrived. The mailman knocked on the door and delivered the big envelope. Alex received it and left it on the table. Tara opened it without waiting. She read in silence and, upon finishing, said, "We have a week." There were arguments between them, phone calls, improvised plans. I didn't interfere. Sunday morning I saw Tara's brothers packing their things. The cousin was carrying bags to the car. Tara was coming and going with boxes. Alex came into my room. "Dad, I don't know if I'm going to be able to find a place so fast, but I'll do what's possible." I looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, I spoke to him calmly. "I don't wish you ill, Alex. I just hope this serves for you to understand that decisions have consequences. Always." Tuesday, the yard was full of things ready to load. Tara's mother passed by me without saying hello. I didn't expect it. Mid-afternoon, the last car left the gate. Alex was the last to go. He stopped at the door. He looked at me, but said nothing. I didn't either. I closed the gate and stayed a moment looking at the empty street. The house was in silence. I walked through every room. Some were dirty, others empty. I didn't feel sadness. I felt peace. I brewed myself a coffee, drank it on the porch, and breathed deep. For the first time in a long time. That place belonged to me truly, not just on paper. In the following days, I cleaned the house, rearranged my things, and padlocked the rooms I wasn't using. I went back to my old routine. Early coffee, market, chats with friends. The tranquility had returned. But it wasn't the same as before. Now I was more conscious of what it costs to keep it. One afternoon, sitting on the porch, I thought about Alex. I didn't know where he was or how he was doing. Maybe one day he would understand that it wasn't a question of money or property, but of respect. And if he didn't understand, it wasn't my job to teach him anymore. What I did know was that I didn't regret it. Doing justice isn't always comfortable, but sleeping with a clear conscience is worth more than any discomfort. And if you, who are listening to me, have reached this far, I'll tell you something. This might just be a story I'm telling, a piece of fiction woven from the hard truths of life. But the lesson is as real as the dirt under your fingernails. Never allow anyone to erase you from your own history. It doesn't matter if you're young or old, rich or poor. Your dignity has no price. Now tell me, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? And while you're at it, tell me, from what corner of the world are you listening? And don't forget to share this story with whoever needs to hear it. Because sometimes, a story like this is the push someone needs to reclaim their place.